Welcome to the Nausea River podcast. I'm Theo Morgan, and by the time you hear this, I'll have gone to at least 50 shows in my lifetime. Now, I miscounted at some point, and I'm not sure if the award for the Big 5-0 goes to Touche Amore or Guar. Quite the contrasting of bands to fight for the coveted title, and yet they both had a black metal band to support that I was really there for. Betrayal of Guilt before Touche Amore, and Dark Funeral before Guar. And yes, I am counting Betrayal of Guilt as a black metal band, even with their obvious hardcore and power violence side. But regardless of who made me reach the milestone, it got me thinking, what are the best shows I've seen in my life so far? The top 10%. Anyways, it wasn't Touche Amore or Guar. I'm just going to talk about my November adventures in bulk at the end of the month, and you'll realize I still thought very highly of those shows. I certainly like Touche Amore, and Guar are a band made for seeing live. It's a metalhead rite of passage to get drenched in fake blood and walk out of the venue shivering and looking ghastly. I, in fact, have been to a lot of great shows, and ranking them seemed almost unfair. But the internet loves a tidy thematic list, and I hope you do too. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some tales. Some from the distant past, some I probably should have just done a podcast episode on, but it's too late for that now. It was February 29th, 2020, and I was packing my overnight bag for the Devin Townsend show the next night. My parents would always have CNN and other news stations on the TV back then, though I tried to be a carefree 20-something-year-old and did my best to tune it out. There was a lot of talk about an emerging pandemic, but the only one I could remember was the swine flu outbreak in 2009. I know swine flu actually had huge implications for healthcare and all, but as a dumb teenager then, I carried on with my normal life through it and figured this one was more of the same. Tune that out too. Still, my mother tried to talk me out of this concert. I know her heart was in the right place, but I didn't listen. If I caught COVID, fine, original 2020 strain COVID, from this show, then maybe it would rank as one of the worst instead of one of the best. But I'm not so sure about that either. Devin Townsend is a hard artist to sum up in a few words. He's a goofy bald guy who changes genres every album. Or he was the angry guy with the skeleton who made City and Alien, and I guess 3 other strapping young lad albums too. He made a rock opera about an omniscient alien traversing the universe for the perfect cup of coffee, and then a sequel to it. He made a country album. He made Empath in 2019, which soundtracked my depressing rides to Boston to visit my uncle in the hospital until his passing. I've had a big soft spot for Townsend ever since I first discovered Strapping Young Lad, but in early 2020, it was bigger and softer than usual. This show making my ranking comes down to Devin and his live band alone, though in hindsight, his tour being supported by the Contortionist and Haken is a prog fan's wet dream. In the 4 years, blame it on the COVID brain fog or whatever, I honestly forgot the Contortionists were even there, but Haken are a blast live. They exude passion and joy in whatever they do. I just remember the singer's smile at the mic. Devin had one of his best live lineups that night, with Morgan Ogren on drums and the impeccable Cheyenne Dorval on backing vocals. I count Key as an underrated gem in the Devin Townsend catalog, and Casualties of Cool sure exists. But Dorval's voice is always the second best compliment to Devin's, only beat by Anneke van Giersbergen. I really like The Gathering, sue me. Also, I had no idea what she looked like until she walked on stage for the opener Super Crush, effortlessly cool and with long, locked hair cascading down her shoulders and back. She's beautiful. My jaw dropped. And I guess I always pictured her looking a lot like Adele instead. And I only missed Anneke's voice on that song a little bit. Townsend has a fun live show. Knowing his unstoppable sense of humor, I hope he did. The stage was strewn with plush toys, and he playfully donned a skirt or tutu around the time they played Why or Ia, but most of all, he actually took audience requests for songs. It's rare for that to actually happen at a show, and his openness was still conditional too. Anything was on the table, sure, but if the band didn't rehearse it, he couldn't play the whole song. But the best part about requests is when the artist listens to you, the girl who knows all the deep cuts. I didn't give him a deep cut for what it's worth. This show was before I got the good sense to stay on stage left at the Paradise, but at center stage I had the perfect spot to yell Earth Day in Devin's ear. I did it a lot, but he played one of the verses to it. And if you hear me annoyingly yell song requests at a show, well, I try to keep it to a minimum now. But consider that I'm also trying to relive that glory. At the end of the day, a good performance and having fun isn't the only thing that gets you into my top 5. Heck, looking back on it, the setlist that Devin and crew put together was a little lacking. I'm a big fan of his material off Infinity and Biomech and Terria, so my dreams got crushed pretty hard. But everything exists on this pink cloud of good vibes. because a good show is made of many parts, like emotion and circumstance. There's Devin's sense of humor tending to mesh with my own really well, as he walks a fine line between vulgar, charming, and wholesome. And then you time things so poorly this becomes the last concert you see for over 3 years, over 4 if only counting indoor shows. I'm not going to blow minds by saying that the pandemic was difficult for me. I'm sure you agree too. But I see a lot of discourse about how we never really had a lockdown in the US, and I wonder what fucking planet they're living on. I did nothing for 3 years besides work and hiking. I also had a panic attack at my brother's bachelor party when we were about to enter a bar. I'm not even particularly vulnerable against COVID, so it really did boil down to anxiety and a crippling fear of what others would think about me if I stepped outside. But the real point is that I had a long time to hold this show dear to my heart, definitely for longer than most of the young men in that room. For a while, it felt like a memory of something I'd never let myself do again. The life I should have had but figured was a missed opportunity. And even after working on myself a lot and attending 30 or so shows in 2024, Townsend's show still shines bright. In a strange way, I hope it gets kicked off the list when I rank my best out of 100 shows. In a couple years, I guess. And for what's worth, I haven't caught COVID from a concert yet. I caught it at a Starbucks in early 2023, and it was really underwhelming. It was a simpler time in April 2019. When I heard about the stacked lineup of Zealand Ardor, Deaf Heaven, and Baroness, I sprung on tickets immediately and would figure out the logistics later. I got to the queue at the Worcester Palladium early, and I think most people are there for Baroness. I like them quite a bit, but my love for Deaf Heaven is more special. I got on that train with Sunbather just like the rest of you, but I secretly love New Bermuda and Ordinary Corrupt Human Love a little bit more. And finally, Zealand Ardor had just released Stranger Fruit the year prior. Deaf Heaven was once the most exciting band that was vaguely adjacent to black metal, and Zealand Ardor were slowly taking their place. Rarely do I see a show where every act is as good, exciting, and eye-catching as the last. It's one that makes me scared to see either act ever again. And as I write this, I prepare to see Zealand Ardor live later this month in the tight confines of Brighton Music Hall. It'll probably be one for the books, but the big stage of the Palladium made the affair seem bigger. It fit the spectacle of music that was so unique and ambitious, and let's be real, a satanic gospel metal sing-along is still that. The voices of Marcel and his 2 backup singers filled the space, and I knew every damn word. Also, they played Baphomet, and I haven't seen that on their set lists in years. Deaf Heaven was still the highlight of the night for me, back when I still had hope that they'd always resemble a black metal band. I kid, I actually like Infinite Granite a lot. It was a bit of a perfect time for them. I feel like a lot of the hate they got for that lush, emotional, ecstatic black gaze style at first had died down by then, and I ignored the bad reviews for Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. It's sad that I don't hear much about Deaf Heaven anymore, even though they still get festival spots in the most mismatched of places. Things have changed at the Palladium and other venues since then. If the same concert happened in 2024, the barricade would have been further back and a swarm of crowd control guys would have stood between us and the stage. It was certainly that way for Opeth, after all. And it's Worcester. I've seen them form circle pits to Nightwish and Electric Wizard. The crowd obviously went nuts for Deaf Heaven at their most metal. But it was 2019, I was a couple feet away from the stage at most. Frontman George Clark got to be very physical with the crowd, leaning into us and dripping sweat all over me. He was a very damp guy who boasted rather long hair back then, giving his sweat more places to drop from. It sounds gross if you're not used to it, but if it wasn't his sweat, it was going to be someone else's. Now, granted, I lost my spot for Baroness. I wanted to see if a pit formed. I wanted to mingle with more people. I wanted to beat the lines to the merch stalls. And of course, my ride got there early and was chomping at the bit for me to leave. What I definitely didn't do was get so cross-faded on booze and an edible that I needed to go to a quiet space and wait for the show to wind down. I had seen my main attractions by then. So what gives, putting a show I mostly forgot the last third of on the list? Not to spoil a future episode, but similar circumstances made for a few of the worst shows I ever attended. So here's what mattered about the night at the Palladium, in my opinion, and started the slow emergence of the kind of person I needed to be at a concert. For starters, it was my first time at the barricade, anywhere. I was still learning how to time my arrival properly, to be one of the first, but not the awkward first in queue, God no. Except when it happened anyways for Touche Amore. And with that stroke of luck, and maybe lying to my mum so she would drive me there earlier, an insufferable queue camping queen was crowned. That's not top show material, that's just becoming annoying. What about the real upside of concerts? The people. The hundreds or thousands or 50 warm bodies breathing down your neck. And they're all potential friends if they can hear you. You very well might be listening to this because I sweet-talked you at a concert and gave you a business card. but I didn't always appreciate the bounty of potential friends. It was hard. I went to a lot of shows with my dad for a while and liked to talk to him more. Or it was an arena show and I got seats instead of general admission, which keep you boxed off from your neighbors. Or, God forbid, I was an off-putting, awkward drunk. I'm not saying I wasn't at the show, but when I walked into the queue and met Ainsley, I was sober and they read me like a book. That is to say, they realized I was a big Zealand Ardor fan like them. We both held onto the barricade and reveled in the metallic bliss of Zealand Ardor and Deaf Heaven, along with some of their other friends. And like some concert acquaintances, we actually did befriend each other on social media and talked sometimes and hoped one day, after the pandemic, to meet in the crowd once more. I could definitely pick out their pink leather jacket, at least. I've made other concert friends since then, distant or close. I invite some of these people to my hypothetical wedding. They're all still alive for what it's worth, but I still have trouble knowing that Ainsley is no longer with us. They were a bright light in this world that got snuffed out. It's not my place to speculate why, and it's not productive to think about what I could have done differently. Maybe if there was no pandemic, a few things changed and I'd be arranging to meet them at Zealand Ardor this year. It'd be like a tradition whenever the strange Swiss band rolled into town. So for that reason, I really hope they play Baphomet on this tour. It was one of Ainsley's favorite songs, and I'll shout the lyrics twice as loud. We can talk about stacked bills, but there are bands that command enough power to stand alone and use the extended set time to their advantage. Usually I think of popular bands that category. Veterans with vast discographies to work a 2-hour or longer set list around, the Bruce Springsteens of the world and all. I mean, it's my example because I've seen them twice, and for Krallice, I will at least say that they have an extensive discography. Krallice are not a popular band. Their fans are extremely passionate, but there's no fame to be found in their unique strain of technical, experimental black metal. They are at least keenly aware of this. They cheekily titled this their world tour, and it was 11 East Coast dates plus Cleveland and Chicago. Cambridge was a lucky starting point for the tour on August 7th, 2024. Otherwise, these guys almost never play live. Bassist Mick Barr ran their merch table, and he couldn't buy anything during the set for that obvious reason. And they were stuffed into the back room of the Middle East upstairs. Colin's keyboards took up half the small stage. Much of the lighting came from a single cubic table lamp they brought with them, so I knew we were in for a great night. In a twist, they were originally booked with 2 local openers, Prayer Position and 5.5 Rats. The promise to us fans was an extra-long Krallice set, but to those 2 bands, there was the promise of leeching off of Krallice's quote-unquote fame. In the 11th hour, they got nixed from the bill. The same thing seemed to happen to their openers in Providence, at least. Now, I did hear rumors as to why, but I feel like I shouldn't be using my platform to promote gossip like that. It's better to look at the positives. Nothing would get in the way of our extra-long Krallice set, and every boring millennial making memes about how shows go too late would be thrilled because it all wrapped up by 10. Krallice truly are a band that can stand on their own, because anyone next to them would look like amateurs. Maybe one day they'll open for Archspire or something wacky like that, but it's more than them cramming a lot of notes into a song. Colin Marston and his team of merry men ultimately developed a really atmospheric form of black metal, dungeon synth-esque melodies beneath dissonant, unusual music that you truly cannot bob your head to. Towards the end of the show, Colin even had a beautiful keyboard solo in his enclosure of keyboards and synths. He's a rather small man by the looks of it and dwarfed by his equipment, but he realized none of it was a waste to transport, and he realized how rare it is to meld technical and beautiful. The members of the band are all masters of their craft. Not many people recognize the names of Mick Barr and Nick McMaster, but those that do know what they're in for. An avalanche of notes and a realization that bass actually does matter in black metal. But no one is plucking at the strings like Mick Barr either, his fingers in a constant fluid motion over the fretboard of his headless bass. The 2 of them are even perfectly competent vocalists. And I got downvoted on Reddit for praising drummer Lev Weinstein. Dumbest shit I've ever seen. The drumming isn't a central feature on any given Krallice record, but Lev is a precise machine on stage. I remember when Gene Hoglan was the famous atomic clock of drumming, and it's time to revive the title for Lev. Sometimes a good night is all about sheer quality, performances, atmosphere, and a solid set list. They pulled out Wretched Wisdom from the vaults, hell yeah. If there's something vaguely negative to say about Krallice, maybe it's that they're cold on stage, concentrating on the art. But I don't want to listen to sloppy Krallice either. That just becomes everyone's local power violence band. Or Behold the Arctopus, the project that still got me into Colin Marston's output. You make a few sacrifices for the best show. Boris, the Japanese drone metal band, among other genres, play in Boston a lot, stopping here on October 21st, 2024 for their Amplifier Worship Anniversary Tour, marked the third year in a row they set up stage at the Paradise. Without the pandemic, I know it would have been more. It feels like they live on the road, so if you missed this one, the best show of your life could still be around the corner. I mean, next year is when Pink turns 20. The show was announced in the spring. I had just resumed my indoor concert life, and that's why I got the news when I was hungover after seeing Septic Flesh and the Drunken Adventures afterwards. And that's what I call a sign that I needed a lesson in patience. Or was that waiting in queue for almost 2 hours before the show, waiting for the next note to be played in a Drone Doom song? For me, it was waiting until the bass line drops in Gambuki. That's when Amplifier Worship started to make sense to me as an album. I'm not going to say it was the perfect Boris show on paper. The Paradise is sounding can be full and captivating, but not particularly loud, which is a detriment when you're playing through an album titled Amplifier Worship. Of course, I'm still here mauling over missing them with the Melvins or my dearly beloved Uniform. It's gotta suck for Starcrawler to have to follow them up when there's otherwise nothing bad to say about them. Maybe, at worst, that they bribed their way onto such a tour through nepotism. Not the most egregious of nepotism, but frontwoman Arrow DeWild is the daughter of a famous concert photographer and the drummer for Father John Misty. It would have put a more sour taste in my mouth if she wasn't chaotic, fun, and a bit unsettling on stage with her odd contortionist movements. They make perfectly acceptable, punky rock and roll otherwise, and by all accounts have a genuine friendship with the members of Boris. Plus, they lured Wada out for one song. More band chef of surprise Wada appearance. On the other hand, the merch was so good that it drew everyone to get in line before showtime, and I probably got the spot I wanted because of it. Once Boris took the stage, the drawing wall of sound of Huge felt like a warm, familiar hug. Something about Boris live was pretty simple, all things considered, but more immersive than any show I've been to. Transporting you to a mind-erasing reverie of doom and noise. It was an hour or so that truly forced a lot of bad or awkward thoughts out of my head. My throat clenched a bit from the volume, though again I think I was expecting my bones to hurt instead. Amplifier Worship is a very good album. It's not what I'd use to introduce a curious listener to Boris, that's what Akuma no Uta or Pink are for, but it does represent a sizable cross-section of their sound. 1/3 drone doom, 1/3 jamming and noodling, and 1/3 moshable metal moments. Not exact fractions, but bear with me there. Combined with picking Scarbox and Mass Mercury and the encore Loveless from elsewhere in their catalog, Boris did the impossible. There was a pit at the Drone Doom concert. Not a crazy one. In fact, the only crowd surfer was, in fact, frontman Atsuo, who took the plunge in the last moments of the show. I had been told it got a lot crazier at other Boris shows. I know they have a diverse catalog. I'm a fan after all. The set was big and immersive and interesting. Don't let anyone try to convince you that Drone Doom is boring. You have to make that judgment for yourself. Atsuo, who in the past has done all the live percussion for Boris as well as vocal duties, freed himself from his drum kit for much of the show. Dressed in a tunic and looking down on his peons between the glacially slow notes, he was an otherworldly force. Or when the tempo picked up, he got physical with the audience. I got my hair rustled twice by the man. He even grabbed my cheeks and yelled in my face. I was beaming throughout it all. It made up for not getting a good view of Wada. I gambled so wrong with that one. Boris are always the epitome of playing music for the love of the craft. I may have spoken about Krallice having extensive discography, but they have nothing on the archives of Boris. They collaborate so often with others, often multiple times. There are established bands that produce fewer albums together than Boris have with Merzbow alone, and they show no signs of stopping or losing creative energy. They've unshackled themselves from genres and spend their time live focusing on what matters the most. I've seen bands of their age start to phone it in more or play it safe. Or, hell, they've gone through lineup changes while Boris have remained a stable passion project for Atsuo, Wada, and Takeshi. And Mushio on drums now, he seems like a gem. It's hard to think of who could really best them in that category. Sun? Would be nice, but I've never seen Sun live. It feels weird to place Boris at number 2. Who could try to clear the competition? Maybe only a band somehow more legendary, high-quality, original, and immersive than Boris. They gotta exist, I'm sure. Surprise, bitches! Number 1 was always gonna be Nightwish, and it ain't even close. Like, oh my god, they played all of Dead Boy's Poem, and Elven Path, and Devil in the Deep Dark Ocean, and they even made me like The Carpenter a lot more. Instant classic, really can't be beat by modern methods, and I know they're never gonna do this tour again. Alright, let's try to explain this one. Nightwish is a longtime fave of mine, but it's one that occupies a weird place in my heart. It's a weird feeling to deeply, deeply love a band and also know they will never get close to your favorite albums again. It's weird for your favorite singer to be the one who's gotten some of the most mediocre material to work with. It's a shockingly unpopular pair of opinions in the Nightwish fandom from what I've seen, and far from the only ones I have. Maybe for another episode. But in short, my dream Nightwish album would be the songwriting and genre choices between Angels Fall First and Century Child with the voice of Fleur Jansen, their current singer since 2013, a throwback of symphonic power metal goodness, guitar solos, and string quartets with the strong and versatile voice of Fleur. Anyways, that's never gonna happen. That iteration of Nightwish doesn't exist anymore, in any form, even if Yesterwind was actually really good. They're down to 2 founding members who have radically different ideas of what they want to write now than they did 25 years ago. It might be an unpopular idea if I polled enough fans on it, but it was popular enough to inspire the Decades Tour in 2018. It was St. Patrick's Day of that year, and I watched the bars of Worcester fill during the last daylight hours, and a yoga class. This was before my Q camping days, but it may not have mattered. The line for Nightwish filled fast with disaffected millennials and college kids who took a wrong turn while listening to Blackmore's Night, and the Palladium was at capacity by the time we were all inside. But if I couldn't be a barricade queen, at least I got a decent standing spot. When Fleur was brought on as their new vocalist, there was a lot of hope that she could mimic the operatic voice of Tarja Turunen that fans sorely missed. In theory, I know she can. I've listened to a lot of After forever. But Fleur made every old song her own, whether Tarja was behind the original or Annette Olsen was. Saying she has a stronger voice than Annette and more power and projection from her lungs isn't a hot take, but maybe saying that Fleur is more dynamic and versatile than Tarja is. Despite some rose-tinted nostalgia, Tarja had been tuning down the dramatic, operatic sound since Century Child, and came out of it sounding rather weak and limited. So yeah, Fleur was the best singer for Slaying the Dreamer. I actually go so far as to say Annette was a solid second. The set list was heavy in the first few albums. If you're like me and it for the Oceanborn Wishmaster biggest hits, it was a dream come true, except that they didn't play The Pharaoh Sails to Orion or Wanderlust, so maybe the show was the worst of all time after all. I don't focus much on lyrics even for bands I like, unless it's dead simple like your average Zeal and Ardor song. But Nightwish was a band I discovered when I was a bored teenager who had memorized CD liner notes and was too scared to pirate my music. It was a brief time in my life, for sure. So I have footage of the show, and it's all crap because I'm singing my heart out. I am pretending that I'm half as good as Fleur Jansen. For me, Nightwish is the same cornerstone of my early adolescence that, I don't know, My Chemical Romance or Linkin Park is for a lot of my peers. It's a revealing choice, one that makes me seem more like a weepy, vaguely religious romantic than I usually come off as. One that doesn't do much to separate me from the emos and mall goths as I thought it did back then. It was hard to find Nightwish fans in my area, unless they were all swarming the Palladium, sue me. I had seen them live in 2008 as well, same venue, and as my first concert. I remember framing them as a much more Christian-friendly band than they really are to make it work. Nightwish's theology is a whole other can of worms. Anyways, them coming back with all the classics is the closest I'll get to understanding the Gen X ladies snatching up tickets for the New Kids in the Block reunion. Funny enough, it's a show I also have trouble looking back on, though none of that is Nightwish's fault. Life is never perfect, and I'm too nice to say what was on my mind for the rest of these shows. One of my only close friendships at the time was starting to go sour before it imploded a few weeks later, and the inevitable loneliness loomed in the background all night. Maybe it was just feeling her apathy, but I blamed myself for being a metalhead. Albeit one listening to one of the safest bands in the genre, I want to think that I'm over it now, able to focus on the positives, like how this was the first show I ever attended alone. Granted, my dad tolerated Nightwish enough to bring me the first time, but it unshackled me from others' approval, even as I craved it elsewhere. One risk, and 6 years later, you're playing hooky from work so you can see Necrot and Street Tombs. Little did I know that I was about to be reborn into someone more funny and adventurous, even though the journey through the birth canal of life was going to be rough. Again, this list was meant to be contextual, as much about feelings as it is about quality. I want it to get completely overhauled over the next 50 shows as I experience memories I didn't think were possible. I want to revisit, the Pallbearer show from June and say it's where everything went right, and then change my mind completely in a decade again. The scene makes my heart full. This podcast helps me make sense of it. And I'm not decrepit yet. I've just been sitting at my desk for too long today. There's a lot to look forward to. So with that, I'm Theo Morgan. Looking forward to show number 51. It's when I crawl over broken glass to see.